My daughter-in-law shoved me against the courthouse wall and shouted that I was a filthy old woman, an embarrassment to the family. She called me that in front of attorneys, clerks, security guards, people rushing past with folders under their arms, high heels clicking on the marble floor, hurrying toward their hearings. And everyone stopped to stare. Valerie Logan, my daughter-in-law, raised her voice as if she were in her own home, as if I were an obstacle in her way. She pointed her finger at me, with those perfectly manicured nails painted dark red, and repeated the same things she had told me privately for years. But this time, she did it in public. This time, she wanted to humiliate me where it hurt the most. My son, Charles, stood a few feet away, motionless, his hands in the pockets of his expensive suit, staring at the floor. He didn't even look up when she pushed me. He didn't even say her name to stop her. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I only felt the cold of the wall against my back, the weight of the stranger's gazes, the heavy silence that settled after she finished shouting. I took a deep breath and lowered my head. I let them think whatever they wanted. I let them believe I was that weak woman, that voiceless old lady, that mother who let herself be trampled because she had nowhere else to go. But inside, something changed, something broke, and it wasn't my heart. It was the last thread of hope I had left that this family still needed me, that I still mattered, that it was still worth it to remain silent. Valerie knew nothing. Charles didn't either. Neither of them knew who I really was. And in that moment, as she continued to speak with contempt, as people started walking again, pretending they hadn't seen anything, I only thought one thing. Just one. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes they will know. I am 71 years old. My name is Agnes Parker. And for 30 years I was a judge in this very courthouse. But they never knew it. I never told them. I preferred to just be Mum, just Grandma, just that woman who made turkey and mashed potatoes on Sundays and secretly gave Charles money when he was having problems. That invisible woman who didn't deserve a seat at the table when there were important guests. I hid my identity as if it were a shameful secret. I concealed my achievements, my degrees, my won cases. Everything. Because I thought that if I were less imposing, if I were smaller, quieter, simpler, then they would love me more. They would need me more. They would include me more. How wrong I was. Valerie finished shouting and turned away. She walked toward the courthouse entrance with her high heels clacking on the floor, her designer briefcase hanging from her shoulder, with the arrogant confidence of someone who believes they have already won. Charles followed her, without looking at me, without apologizing, without anything. I stayed there for a few more seconds. I took a deep breath. I adjusted the beige sweater I was wearing, the one Valerie always said made me look older. I ran my hand over my grey hair, the hair she suggested I dye because it gave a bad impression, and I walked toward the courthouse entrance. But I didn't enter through the main door. I didn't walk behind them. I didn't hide in a corner like they expected. I took the side hallway, the one only those of us who work here use, the one that leads directly to the private offices, to the deliberation rooms, to the changing rooms where we keep our robes. I crossed that hallway in silence. I nodded at Patricia, the clerk who has worked here for 20 years. She smiled at me. She asked if I was ready for today's case. I told her yes, more than ready. I went into the changing room. I took off the beige sweater. I took off the flat shoes that Valerie said looked like something a poor lady would wear. I put on the black robe, the one hanging in the closet with my name embroidered inside. Agnes Parker, Judge, Courtroom 3. I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old, grey hair, wrinkles around my eyes, hands that trembled a little, Not from fear, but from anticipation. I put on the glasses I only use for reading long documents. I adjusted the robe. And I walked out. I walked down the long hallway that leads to courtroom 3, the one where the portraits of all the judges who have worked here since 1950 are hung. My portrait is there, third painting from the left, but they never saw it. They never asked. They never cared. I reached the courtroom door. I pushed it slowly. The security guard held it open for me. Inside, people were already sitting. Lawyers, witnesses, family members. And in the first row on the right side, there she was. Valerie Logan, sitting with her back straight, reviewing papers, talking quietly with her assistant, confident, sure of herself, ready to win her case. Charles was sitting 2 rows behind her, just watching, waiting, still not imagining anything. I entered through the side door, the one that leads directly to the bench. I went up the 3 wooden steps. I sat in the high chair, the one that has my name engraved on a small plaque on the back. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur of the room continued for a few more seconds, until someone looked up, until someone realized, until the silence began to spread like a wave. Valerie still hadn't seen me. She was still reviewing her papers, talking, laughing softly with her assistant. So focused on her own world that she didn't notice the entire room had stopped moving. Then the court clerk stood up. He cleared his throat, and he said aloud what everyone was waiting to hear. "All rise. The Honourable Judge Agnes Parker will preside over this hearing." Valerie looked up, slowly, as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if the words made no sense. Her eyes scanned the room, searching, trying to understand, until they found me. She saw me sitting there, wearing the robe, with the glasses in my hand, with the same face she had insulted 10 minutes earlier at the courthouse door. Her face changed, first confusion, then disbelief, then panic. Her mouth opened slightly. Her hands dropped the papers she was holding. And for the first time in all the years I've known her, Valerie Logan was speechless. I didn't smile. I didn't make any gesture. I just stared at her, calmly, with the same calm I had maintained outside when she pushed me, when she insulted me, when she treated me like trash. Charles saw me too. He stood up abruptly. His face reflected something I had never seen before: fear, shame, complete confusion. But I didn't give them time to process. I didn't give them time to react. I picked up the wooden gavel that was on my right. I raised it, and I brought it down against the desk with a sharp bang that echoed throughout the room. "This court is in session." Everyone stood up. The whole room rose to its feet. Everyone except Valerie. She was still sitting, paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me, as if she were seeing a ghost. I kept my gaze fixed forward, professional, cold, exactly as I had done for 30 years, exactly as I should have done with them from the beginning. "This is case number 2025-037. Attorney Valerie Logan represents the plaintiff. Are you ready to proceed?" Silence. Valerie didn't answer. She couldn't. She kept looking at me as if the world had turned upside down. "Attorney Logan, I asked if you are ready to proceed." She blinked. She swallowed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken. Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor." That same woman who called me a filthy old woman 10 minutes ago was now calling me Your Honor. That same woman who pushed me against a wall was now trembling in front of me. And I, Agnes Parker, 71 years old, Charles's mother, grandmother of 2 girls who barely know me, only thought one thing as I watched her crumble. It's just beginning. There was a time when I believed that being a mother was enough, that being a grandmother was a gift, that my place in this family was secured simply by existing, by having given life, by having been there every time they needed me. But things don't work that way. Not when your children grow up and forget where they came from. Not when they marry people who turn them into strangers. Charles was born when I was 26 years old. His father, Michael, was a good man, hardworking, honest. He died of a heart attack when Charles was just 15 years old. I was left alone, with a teenage son, with a house we were still paying for, with bills that never stopped coming. But I didn't give up. I worked double shifts for years. I finished my law studies while Charles slept. I studied at the kitchen table until 3 o'clock in the morning, with a cup of cold coffee next to me and books scattered everywhere. I graduated with honours. I got a job at the prosecutor's office. I climbed the ranks. I became a judge at 42 years old. I did everything for him, to give him a better life. So he could go to a good university, so he wouldn't lack for anything. And Charles succeeded. He graduated as a lawyer. He opened his own firm. He started making money. A lot of money. I was proud. So proud it hurt. I looked at my son wearing expensive suits, driving a new car, eating at restaurants I had never been to, and I thought that everything had been worth it, that all those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Then he met Valerie. The first time I saw her was at a Thanksgiving dinner. Charles brought her without warning. She arrived in a tight black dress, very high heels, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Contempt. She sat at my table. She looked around my house with an expression she couldn't completely hide, as if she were evaluating every old piece of furniture, every faded curtain, every chipped plate I had used for decades. I served her the dinner I had prepared, roasted chicken with potatoes and salad. Nothing fancy, nothing sophisticated, just homemade food made with love. Valerie barely took 2 bites. She said it was delicious, but she was watching her figure. Charles didn't say anything. He just ate in silence while she talked about her work, her important clients, the cases she had won. That night, when they left, I heard Valerie talking to Charles at the door. She wasn't yelling, but her voice was clear, cold. "Your mother lives in this tiny house. Can't you do something about that?" "It gives a bad impression, Charles. People will think you don't care." Charles mumbled something I couldn't hear. But he didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. And I, standing on the other side of the door, my hands still wet from washing dishes, felt something break inside me. But I told myself it was just a first impression, that Valerie was nervous, that things would get better over time, that she just needed to get to know me better. How naive I was. They got married 6 months later, a big, ostentatious wedding in a ballroom that cost over $50,000. I didn't give my opinion on anything. They didn't ask for my opinion. They just told me the date and the place. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, behind Valerie's important friends, behind Charles's firm partners, like just another guest, like someone who didn't really matter. After the wedding, things changed. Charles started visiting me less. The calls became shorter. The Sunday lunches we used to share gradually disappeared. There was always an excuse: work, travel, social commitments. And when he did come, Valerie came with him, always critical, always pointing out what was wrong with my house. The walls needed paint. The furniture was outdated. The yard was neglected. I should hire someone to help me. I should move to a smaller place. I should. She never asked how I was. She never asked if I needed anything. She only pointed out my flaws, as if they were obvious to everyone. Charles didn't say anything. He stayed sitting on the sofa, looking at his phone, nodding distractedly while she talked. And I smiled. I nodded. I thanked her for her advice, even though it hurt, because I thought that if I showed myself to be docile, if I made myself small, if I didn't cause problems, then they would keep coming. Then I would still be a part of their lives. But each visit was worse than the last, each comment more hurtful, each silence from Charles heavier. Then the girls were born, Natalie first, 2 years later. Olivia, my granddaughters. Two beautiful creatures with Charles's eyes and Michael's smile. I thought everything would change. I thought that being a grandmother would give me a new place in the family, a purpose, a reason for them to need me again. But Valerie wouldn't let me see them. There was always a reason. The girls were sick. They had activities. They were tired. Valerie preferred them to be with the other grandmother, her mother, who lived in a big house with a pool and staff. I sent them gifts on their birthdays, dolls, books, clothes that I chose carefully. I never received a thank you call. I never saw photos of them wearing what I had sent. Just silence. One day I plucked up the courage and asked Charles if I could take the girls to the park. Just a few hours, just to get to know them better, so they would know who their grandmother was. Charles was silent for a long moment. Then he said he would talk to Valerie. That conversation never happened, or if it did, the answer was no, because he never mentioned it again. And I didn't insist, because I didn't want to be annoying. I didn't want to be the type of mother-in-law who causes problems. The years passed. I retired from the courthouse at 68 years old. 30 years of service, hundreds of cases, thousands of decisions that changed lives. But on the day of my retirement, Charles didn't go to the ceremony. He said he had an important hearing. Valerie didn't even respond to my message. I went home alone that afternoon, with a commemorative plaque under my arm, with a bouquet of flowers my colleagues gave me, with a heart so heavy I could barely breathe. And there, sitting in my empty living room, looking at the walls Valerie said needed paint, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them I had been a judge. I wouldn't tell them about my career. I wouldn't show them my achievements. Because if 30 years of work hadn't made Charles come to my retirement ceremony, then nothing would. I would just be mum, just grandma, just that simple woman who lived in a small house and didn't bother too much. But that decision came with a price, because the more invisible I made myself, the more they treated me as if I didn't exist. Family gatherings at Charles's house became frequent. Elegant dinners, birthday parties for the girls, gatherings with important friends. I was never invited. I found out by chance. From a photo on social media, from a comment Charles accidentally let slip. Once I showed up unannounced at one of those parties. It was Natalie's birthday. My granddaughter was turning 8 years old. I rang the doorbell with a gift in my hands, a storybook I had looked for in different bookstores for weeks. Valerie opened the door. She looked me up and down. She wouldn't let me in. "Agnes, I didn't know you were coming. This is just for close family and Natalie's friends. There's no room at the table." "I am family," I said. "I am her grandmother." Valerie smiled. A cold smile. Calculated. "Of course you are. But the child doesn't know you well. We don't want her to feel uncomfortable at her own party." She closed the door in my face. I stood there at the entrance, with the gift in my hands, listening to the laughter coming from inside. Children's laughter, music, happiness. Everything on the other side of that closed door. I walked back to my house. I didn't take a taxi. I didn't call anyone. I just walked the 15 blocks back with the book under my arm and tears running down my face. That night I wondered what I had done wrong. At what point did I lose my son? At what point did I stop mattering? But I found no answers, only a huge void that grew bigger every day. 2 more years passed. Things didn't get better. They got worse. Charles stopped visiting me completely. Phone calls were reduced to one every 2 months. 5-minute conversations where he asked if I was okay, and I said yes, even though it wasn't true. Then, 6 months ago, I found something that changed everything. Something that woke me up from that silent nightmare I was living in. It was an accident. Charles came to my house because he needed some old documents I was keeping, his father's life insurance papers. He came in a hurry. He left his phone on the kitchen table while he searched in the study. And the phone rang. It was a message. The screen lit up. And I accidentally saw what it said. It was from Valerie. I already spoke to the attorney. We can have her declared incompetent in 6 months. The house is worth $200,000. We sell it and keep the money. She can go to a nursing home. She won't even realize it. I read that message 3 times. 4. 5. The letters burned in my eyes as if they were made of fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move my fingers. I could only stand there, staring at that illuminated screen, those cold, calculated words that had just shattered what little was left of my world. Declare her incompetent. As if I were an object. As if at 71 years old I no longer had a mind of my own. As if I couldn't make my own decisions. As if I were a burden that had to be quickly and guiltlessly discarded. The house is worth $200,000. That house where I raised Charles. Where I cried over Michael's death. Where I spent whole nights studying to become a judge. Where I kept every memory of my life. That house I paid for with my work, with my effort, with my own hands. They wanted to sell it, keep the money, and send me to a nursing home as if I were trash. I heard Charles's footsteps returning from the study. I picked up the phone and put it exactly where it was. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I took a deep breath, and when he walked into the kitchen with the papers in his hand, I was pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. Thanks, Mum. I have to go. Meeting in half an hour. Of course, son. Drive safely. He kissed me on the forehead. A quick kiss. Automatic. Meaningless. He took his phone. He left. And I stayed there, standing in my kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring into the darkness, trying to process what I had read, trying to understand how my own son could do something like that, how he could plan my life without consulting me, without asking me, without even having the decency to look me in the eye. But I already knew the answer. Charles wasn't the son I raised. He wasn't the boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares. He wasn't the teenager who hugged me when he missed his father. That Charles had disappeared years ago, replaced by a man who only looked forward. Toward money. Toward status. Toward what Valerie told him to look at. And Valerie, that woman who entered my life like a silent storm and destroyed everything in her path. She was the architect of my pain, the one who whispered poison in my son's ear, the one who turned me into an enemy every time I opened my mouth. But there was something she didn't know, something Charles didn't know either. I wasn't a defenseless old woman who was going to let herself be trampled without doing anything. I wasn't a woman without resources, without intelligence, without power. For 30 years I was a judge. I resolved cases of inheritance, of fraud, of family manipulation. I saw children betraying parents, wives stealing from husbands, families destroying themselves over money. And I learned something fundamental. The law does not forgive those who act with malice. And justice, when applied correctly, can change everything. The next morning, I called my attorney, Louis Oliver, a man I met 20 years ago when I presided over his case. He had been unjustly accused of fraud. The evidence was flimsy. The prosecution was in a hurry. But I took the time to review every document, every testimony, and I discovered he was innocent. I acquitted him. I gave him a second chance. And he never forgot it. Every year, on the date of the verdict, he sent me a card thanking me. Every Christmas, I received a fruit basket with a handwritten note, and when I retired, he was one of the few who attended my ceremony. Louis answered my call on the second ring. "Mrs. Parker, what a surprise. How are you?" "I need your help, Louis. It's urgent." We met in his office that same afternoon. I told him everything, the message I had seen, the years of contempt, Valerie's plan to have me declared incompetent. Louis listened in silence, taking notes, shaking his head in disapproval. When I finished, he put the pen down on the desk and looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much in his life. "Mrs. Parker, this is serious, but we have options, and we have time. If they are going to try to declare you incompetent, they will need medical evidence, psychological evaluations, testimonies. They can't do it overnight. I know, but I don't want to wait for them to try. I want to protect myself. I want that when the time comes, they don't have a chance." Louis nodded. "Then we're going to bulletproof you, legally, medically, emotionally. We are going to get evaluations of your mental health, certificates of your cognitive capacity. We are going to revise your will, and we are going to make sure that no one, absolutely no one, can touch you without your consent." That's what we did. For the following weeks, I underwent neurological evaluations, memory tests, complete psychological exams. The results were impeccable. My mind was completely healthy. My decision-making capacity was intact. Any judge who reviewed those documents would conclude the same. There was no way to declare me incompetent. Louis also revised my will. We completely rewrote it. Charles was still my heir, but with conditions. He could not sell the house without my express authorization. He could not make decisions about my health without my consent. He could not receive a single cent until I died. And if he tried to manipulate my will while I was alive, he would lose everything. I signed every document with a steady hand, without hesitation, without tears. Because this was no longer about pain. This was about survival. But I didn't stop there. I started investigating. Louis hired a private investigator, a discreet man who had worked on similar cases. We asked him to follow Valerie, to check her finances, her legal cases, her movements. And what we found was worse than I imagined. Valerie had been diverting money from the firm she shared with Charles, small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there. But over time, the sums grew. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 that disappeared into phantom accounts. Charles knew nothing, or pretended not to know, but the evidence was there. Transfers, receipts, emails where Valerie talked to her accountant about how to hide the money, how to disguise it as operating expenses. We also discovered that Valerie had debts. Many debts. Credit cards with balances of $30,000, personal loans she hadn't paid. And worst of all, she had mortgaged the house where they lived with Charles without him knowing. She forged his signature. She used the firm's papers to make it look legitimate. That woman was desperate, and my house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. That's why she wanted to declare me incompetent. That's why she wanted to sell it fast. because she needed the money before everything collapsed. Louis organized all the documents into a thick folder. Proof of fraud, proof of forgery, proof of embezzlement. Enough to ruin Valerie's career. Enough to get her into serious legal trouble. But I didn't want to use it yet. Not immediately. Because there was something else I wanted. Something more important than legal justice. I wanted them to know who I was. I wanted them to see me. Really see me. Not as the annoying old woman who was cluttering up their perfect lives, but as the woman I had always been. The judge, the professional, the one who had resolved cases more complicated than any they had touched. Louis looked at me curiously when I told him my plan. "Are you sure, Mrs. Parker? This can be risky. If they suspect something ahead of time, they could change their strategy." "I'm sure. Trust me, Louis. I know what I'm doing." And yes, I did know, because I had spent 3 decades doing exactly this, planning, strategizing, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Louis made some calls. He called his contacts at the courthouse. He asked about upcoming cases where Valerie was involved as an attorney. And he found one. A big case, important. One that Valerie had been preparing for months. It was a commercial dispute case, one company suing another for breach of contract. The amount at stake was $500,000. Valerie represented the plaintiff, and she needed to win, because if she lost, her reputation would be stained. Clients would start to doubt, and with the debts she had, she couldn't afford that luxury. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, a Tuesday morning, courtroom 3 of the courthouse. Louis smiled when he told me. "Guess who was assigned as the judge for that case?" I smiled too, for the first time in months. A real smile, a smile that came from some deep place I thought was dead. "Tell me." "Patricia, your former clerk. She handles the assignments now, and when she saw the case, she thought you might be interested in coming back. Just this once. As a visiting judge, a special favor." "Patricia did that?" "Yes. She always thought highly of you, Mrs. Parker. And when I told her what was happening, without going into details, she understood. She said it would be an honor to have you back, even if just for a day." I accepted. Of course I accepted. Because this was more than a legal case. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment where everything would change. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I reviewed every document of the case, every argument, every legal precedent. I made sure I knew every detail better than the attorneys themselves. I also prepared myself emotionally, because I knew that when Valerie saw me sitting in that chair, when Charles finally understood who his mother was, everything was going to explode. And I needed to be ready. I needed to be strong. I needed to remain calm, even if I was shaking inside. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, reviewing every word I would say, every gesture I would make. I thought of Michael, how proud he would be, how he would hug me and tell me I did the right thing. And I thought of Charles, the boy he was, the man he became. And I wondered if there was still anything left of the son I loved inside that stranger who planned to lock me up. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I got up. I showered. I dressed in simple clothes, a beige sweater, dark pants, flat shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they expected, fragile, insignificant, invisible. I took a taxi to the courthouse. I arrived early. I stood outside, looking at that building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had made decisions that changed destinies, where I had been someone important. And then I saw them arrive. Charles first, with his grey suit, his leather briefcase, his serious face, and behind him Valerie, with her black dress, her high heels, that arrogant smile I knew so well. They didn't see me at first. They were walking fast, talking to each other. Valerie was saying something about the case, about how she was going to destroy the opposing party, about how this triumph would open important doors for them. Then they saw me, and everything changed. Valerie stopped abruptly when she saw me standing next to the courthouse entrance. Her eyes scanned me up and down with that contempt I knew so well. Charles looked away, uncomfortable, as he always did when he knew something was wrong but didn't want to confront it. "Agnes, what are you doing here?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, as if I had no right to be in that public place, as if my mere presence were an offense. "Good morning, Valerie. Good morning, Charles." My voice came out calm, serene, exactly as I had practiced it. Charles mumbled a barely audible greeting. Valerie didn't even respond. She just looked at me with those cold eyes that seemed to evaluate how long it would take her to get rid of me. "Do you have some paperwork here? Because if you need help with something legal, you can go somewhere else. We have an important hearing." I smiled, a small smile, controlled. "I know. Good luck with your case." Valerie frowned, confused, probably wondering how I knew about her case, but I didn't give her time to ask. I turned around and started walking toward the entrance. And then it happened. Valerie caught up to me in 3 steps. She grabbed my arm, hard. Her fingers dug into my skin like claws. "Wait, why are you really here? Did you come to bother us? Did you come to make us look bad in front of important people?" Her voice rose in volume. People started turning around. To look. Lawyers, clerks, security guards, all witnesses to what was about to happen. "Valerie, let go of me, please." "No. I want to know what you're doing here. You always show up where you're not called. Always in the way. Always ruining everything." She pushed me, not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make me stumble back against the wall. My back hit the cold concrete. The pain spread through my old bones. Charles was still standing there, 10 feet away, watching, doing nothing. "You're an embarrassment, Agnes. A filthy old woman who doesn't know when to disappear. Look at you, in those horrible clothes, with that unkempt hair. You're pitiful. You're pitiful to your own son. That's why we never invite you to anything, because you embarrass us." The words came out of her mouth like poison, and each one stabbed me in the chest. But I didn't answer. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her, memorizing every detail of her face, every cruel gesture, because I knew that in a few minutes all that would change. Valerie let go of me with a final shove. She shook her hands as if she had just touched something dirty. Charles finally approached, but not to me, to her. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of complicity. "Let's go, Valerie. We're going to be late." She nodded. She gave me one last look of contempt, and they both walked toward the courthouse entrance without looking back. I stayed there for a few more seconds, breathing, feeling the sting on my cheek where her hand had struck me, feeling the pain in my back where the wall had met me, feeling every cell in my body scream for justice. Then I moved. Not through the main door, not behind them. I took the side hallway, the one only the judges used, the one that led directly to the private offices. Patricia was waiting for me. She hugged me as soon as she saw me. "Mrs. Parker, you're trembling. Are you okay?" "I'm perfectly fine, Patricia. Thank you for this, for everything." She took me to the changing room. She helped me take off the beige sweater. She reached for the black robe hanging in the closet with my name. Agnes Parker, Judge. I put it on slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric, feeling something inside me wake up after years of being dormant. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was dignity. It was a reminder of who I had always been, who I still was, despite everything. Patricia looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We miss you here, Mrs. Parker. This place isn't the same without you." "I missed you too." I adjusted the robe. I put on my glasses. I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old, grey hair, wrinkles that told stories of pain and resilience, but also strength, also wisdom, also power. "I'm ready." Patricia walked me to the door of courtroom 3. Before I entered, she squeezed my hand. "Make them understand who you are, Mrs. Parker. Make them see." "I will." I pushed the door open. The security guard greeted me with respect. He opened the way for me, and I entered that courtroom that I knew by heart, where I had spent thousands of hours, where I had changed lives with my decisions. The room was full. Valerie was sitting in the first row, reviewing papers, talking with her assistant, so confident, so sure of her victory. Charles was further back, alone, waiting, without imagining what was about to happen. I went up the 3 steps of the bench. I sat in the high chair. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur of the room continued, until someone looked up, until the silence began to spread like an oil stain. Valerie still didn't see me, concentrated on her documents, in her perfect world that was about to collapse. The court clerk stood up. He cleared his throat. "All rise. The Honourable Judge Agnes Parker will preside over this hearing." And that's when Valerie looked up, when she saw me, when her whole world stopped. Valerie's face went through a dozen emotions in a matter of seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure panic. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The papers she was holding in her hands fell to the floor with a dry sound that echoed in the absolute silence of the room. Charles stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backward. His face had lost all colour. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost, as if the world as he knew it had just broken into 1,000 pieces. I didn't say anything yet. I just observed them, calmly, with the same serenity I had maintained for 30 years in this place, the same one I had used to face aggressive lawyers, lying witnesses, and impossible cases. The clerk spoke again, his voice cutting the heavy silence. "All rise to receive your honour." The whole room stood up, everyone except Valerie. She was still sitting, paralysed, her eyes fixed on me as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her assistant had to touch her shoulder twice before she finally reacted and stood up with trembling legs. "Good morning. Please be seated." My voice came out firm, clear, exactly as it should be. The room obeyed. The sound of bodies settling into chairs filled the space for a moment. I opened the folder in front of me. Case number 2025-037, Valley Construction Company versus Cedillo Urban Developments. Contractual dispute over breach of clauses. Amount claimed, $500,000. I looked up. Attorney Valerie Logan represents the plaintiff. Attorney Cesar Vallejo represents the defendant. Are both parties present and ready to proceed? The defense attorney answered immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." Valerie was still silent. Her assistant nudged her discreetly. She blinked. She swallowed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. Yes, excuse me." "Attorney Logan, I didn't hear you. Are you ready to proceed?" My tone was professional, neutral, Exactly the same one I used with any attorney. But my eyes looked directly at her, and she knew. She knew that I knew. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Yes, Your Honor, I am ready. Excellent. Then let us begin. Attorney Logan, present your opening arguments. Valerie stood up. Her hands trembled as she collected the papers from the floor. Some fell again. Her assistant bent down to help her. The entire room watched. Some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Everyone felt that something was out of place. Valerie finally managed to stand in front of the bench. She took a deep breath. She tried to regain that arrogant confidence that characterized her, but she couldn't. Her voice came out insecure, choppy. Your Honor, my client, Valley Construction Company, signed a contract with Cedillo Urban Developments for a value of $1,200,000. I stopped there. I raised my hand. Excuse me, Attorney Logan. According to the documents I have in front of me, the contract was for $1,500,000, not $1,200,000. Valerie paled even more. She searched frantically among her papers. You are right, Your Honor. I made a mistake. $1,500,000. Continue. She tried to continue, but her concentration was shattered. She got the dates wrong. She mentioned incorrect clauses. She forgot fundamental details that any competent lawyer should know by heart in a case she had prepared for months. I corrected her every time, patiently, professionally, but also firmly, exactly as I would with any lawyer who came unprepared to my courtroom. Charles was still sitting in the back. I saw him out of the corner of my eye. His head was in his hands. His world was collapsing. Everything he thought he knew about his mother, about his life, about reality itself, was falling apart. After 20 minutes of disastrous arguments, I stopped Valerie. Attorney Logan, I see you are having difficulty presenting your arguments coherently. Do you need a recess? No, Your Honor. I can continue. Are you sure? Because if you are not properly prepared for this case, I can postpone the hearing. I saw the panic in her eyes. Postponing meant admitting incompetence. It meant her client would lose confidence. It meant the end of her reputation. I am prepared, Your Honor. Then I suggest you focus on the facts and stop wasting this court's time with basic errors. Yes, Your Honor. The humiliation on her face was evident. That woman who had called me a filthy old woman less than an hour ago was now being reprimanded by me in front of a room full of professionals. That woman who had pushed me against a wall was now trembling under my gaze. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. This wasn't personal revenge. This was justice. This was showing them who I really was. Not the weak mother they thought, not the old woman who was in the way, but the respected professional, the judge who had earned her place with work and dedication. Valerie finally finished her opening argument. She sat down with her face red with shame. Her assistant whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead with an empty expression. Attorney Vallejo, your opening arguments, please. The defense attorney stood up. He presented his arguments clearly, organized, professionally. Everything Valerie had failed to do. The difference was abysmal. When he finished, I reviewed my notes, I analyzed the documents, and then I said something I knew would destroy Valerie. Attorney Logan, I have reviewed the documents you presented, and I note several inconsistencies. The dates on some of the contracts do not match the testimonies you mention. The amounts you are claiming are not backed up by the attached invoices. And there are 3 clauses that your argument directly contradicts. I paused. I looked at her directly, Can you explain these inconsistencies? Valerie stood up awkwardly. She opened and closed her mouth several times. She searched desperately among her papers, but she had no answers, because the truth was that she had prepared the case halfway, confident in her ability to improvise, to manipulate, to win with arrogance instead of work. I would need to review my files, Your Honor. You should have reviewed your files before coming to my courtroom, Attorney Logan. This court does not tolerate professional negligence. The silence that followed was crushing. Everyone in the room knew what had just happened. Valerie Logan, the arrogant lawyer who thought she was invincible, had just been exposed as incompetent by a judge who turned out to be her own mother-in-law. Charles suddenly got up. He almost ran out of the room. The door closed behind him with a dry bang. Valerie watched him leave. And in her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear, because she knew that Charles had just understood everything, that his mother was not what he thought, and that his wife had just humiliated herself in front of the woman they planned to destroy. We will take a recess of 30 minutes. When we return, I expect both parties to be ready to proceed with professionalism. This hearing will resume at 11 o'clock. I banged the gavel against the desk. The sound echoed in the room like thunder. Court is recessed. The room slowly emptied. Valerie remained seated, motionless, with a lost gaze. Her assistant tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. I stepped down from the bench. I walked toward my temporary office with my back straight and my head held high. Every step resonated in the empty hallway, and as I walked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power, dignity, and the absolute certainty that this was just beginning. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. I sat in the small office that Patricia had prepared for me, looking out the window toward the courthouse parking lot. From there, I could see Charles pacing next to his car, his phone glued to his ear. He gestured with his free hand. He ran his fingers through his hair. He looked desperate. Patricia came in with a cup of hot tea. "How do you feel, Mrs. Parker?" "Like I just woke up after sleeping for 3 years." She smiled sadly. "The whole room is talking. No one can believe that you are Valerie Logan's mother. Some of the younger attorneys didn't even know you had been a judge here." I slowly drank the tea, feeling the warmth go down my throat. Outside, Charles had stopped pacing. Now he was sitting on the hood of his car with his head in his hands. Alone. Broken. A part of me wanted to go out, hug him, tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the part that had woken up when I read that message, knew this was necessary, that I couldn't continue being the mother who made herself small so they could feel big. Patricia approached the window and followed my gaze. "Do you think he knew who you were?" "No. Charles never asked about my job. He was never interested in knowing what I did when I wasn't with him. When he graduated from college, I was already a judge, but he was so busy building his own career that he never looked back. He never saw the woman who sacrificed everything so he could have that career. It must have hurt him a lot. It did hurt. For years. But now it doesn't hurt anymore. Now I only feel clarity." The clock chimed, marking 10:50 o'clock. It was time to go back. Patricia helped me adjust the robe. I looked at myself one last time in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The eyes that looked back were no longer those of a broken woman. They were those of a judge, those of someone who had recovered her identity. I returned to the courtroom through the same side hallway. When I entered, everyone was already in their places. Valerie had regained some composure. She had touched up her makeup. She had straightened her back. But her eyes still showed that barely contained panic. Charles had returned. He was sitting in the same place as before, But now he looked at me differently, no longer with indifference, now with something I couldn't completely decipher. Astonishment? Shame? Fear? I went up to the bench. I sat down. I banged the gavel once. Court is back in session. Attorney Logan, you have the floor. I hope you used the recess to better organize your arguments. Valerie stood up. This time she carried a new folder that her assistant had surely prepared during the recess. She took a deep breath and began to speak with more control than before. Your Honor, my client fulfilled all the obligations stipulated in the contract. They delivered the materials on the agreed dates. Payments were made according to the established schedule. However, the defendant did not fulfill its obligation to begin construction within the 90-day period, as established in Clause 7-3. Better, much better than before. But I had already reviewed the entire case during the recess. I knew every detail, every weak point in her argument. I listened to her for 15 minutes. I took notes. And when she finished, I started asking questions. Specific questions. Questions that any judge would ask in a case like this. Nothing personal, nothing outside of professional conduct. Attorney Logan, you mentioned that your client fulfilled all obligations. However, according to the testimony of the site engineer that appears on page 42 of the documents, there was a 3-week delay in the delivery of materials. Can you explain that discrepancy? I saw Valerie frantically search for that page. How her hands trembled as she flipped through the sheets. How her confidence crumbled again. That delay was due to circumstances outside of my client's control, Your Honor. A problem with the supplier. Do you have documentation to support that statement? I would have to review. Attorney Logan, I remind you that this is a trial, not an informal meeting. You are expected to have all necessary documentation on hand. If you do not have it, state it clearly. I do not have that documentation at this moment, Your Honor. Then your argument that your client fulfilled all obligations remains unsupported. Continue with your other points. Valerie's face turned red, with shame, with contained rage. But she couldn't do anything. She was in my courtroom, under my rules, and the rules were the same for everyone. The defense attorney, Cesar Vallejo, took advantage of every one of Valerie's mistakes. He presented solid evidence, verifiable testimonies, signed contracts that contradicted what she claimed. He was a competent professional, facing someone who had relied too much on her arrogance. After 2 hours of hearing, I had enough information. Both parties had presented their cases. Now it was time to deliberate. We will take a recess of 1 hour. After that time, I will deliver my verdict. Court is recessed. I banged the gavel. The room began to empty. Valerie remained seated, head bowed. Her assistant spoke to her in a low voice, but she didn't seem to hear. Charles approached her. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Valerie looked up and said something I couldn't hear, but I saw Charles shake his head. How he withdrew his hand. How for the first time in years he wasn't on her side. I returned to my office. Louis Oliver was waiting for me. He had been in the room throughout the hearing, sitting discreetly in the last row. Mrs. Parker, you did it perfectly. Professional, impartial. No one can say you acted with favoritism or malice. I acted with nothing but the law, Louis, as I always did. I know, but I also know this must be difficult for you. It's your family. It was my family. Now I don't know what they are. Louis placed the thick folder with all the evidence we had collected on the desk. The fraud, the debts, the forged mortgage, everything. Are you going to use this? Not today. Today I'm just going to do my job as a judge. I'm going to deliver a verdict based on the evidence presented. Nothing more, nothing less. And after? We'll see after. But they need to know they can't keep playing games with me, that I'm not the defenseless old woman they thought. I spent that hour reviewing every document of the case again, taking notes, analyzing the arguments of both sides. And even though Valerie was part of my family, even though every emotional fiber of my being wanted to punish her for all the harm she had done to me, my duty as a judge was more important. The evidence was clear. Valerie's case had enormous holes, inconsistencies she couldn't explain, lack of crucial documentation. Her client had breached first, even though she insisted otherwise. I made my decision. I wrote it on 2 pages, clear, substantiated, fair. When the clock struck 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned to the courtroom. Everyone was already waiting. The silence was absolute. Valerie had her fists clenched on the table. Charles was pale as a ghost. I sat down. I banged the gavel. I have carefully reviewed all the evidence presented by both parties. I have analysed the testimonies, the contracts, and the attached documentation, and I have reached a conclusion. I paused. I looked directly at Valerie. The plaintiff, represented by attorney Valerie Logan, has failed to prove with sufficient evidence that the defendant breached the contract. On the contrary, the evidence presented by the defense demonstrates that it was the plaintiff who breached first by failing to deliver the materials within the established deadlines. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant. The claim is dismissed. The costs of the suit will be covered by the plaintiff. The bang of the gavel echoed like thunder in the silent room. Valerie collapsed, literally. Her body bent over the table. Her assistant had to hold her up. She had lost. And she hadn't just lost the case, she had lost her reputation. Because everyone in that room now knew she had been defeated by her own mother-in-law, the filthy old woman she had humiliated that very morning. Charles had his hands over his face. His shoulders were shaking. And I, sitting in my judge's chair, my robe and my dignity intact, only felt one thing: peace. The room slowly emptied. The defense attorney shook his client's hand with a smile of satisfaction. Assistants collected documents. Security guards opened the doors for people to leave. But Valerie was still there, sitting, with her gaze lost somewhere on the wall. Charles finally approached her. He spoke to her in a low voice. He tried to take her arm to help her up, but Valerie pulled away with a sharp movement. She stood up alone, swaying slightly on her high heels. Then she looked at me, directly, and in her eyes I saw something beyond panic and shame. I saw pure hatred, unfiltered, unmasked. She walked toward the bench. Her assistant tried to stop her, but she pulled free. She went up 2 of the 3 steps that separated her from me. The security guard took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. Valerie stood there, looking up at me from below, her face contorted with rage. "This was planned. You did it on purpose. You lied to us your whole life. You never told us you were a judge. Why? So you could humiliate me now?" Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from fury contained throughout the hearing that now exploded. Of all the control she had had to maintain in front of the witnesses. "I didn't lie to anyone, Valerie. You simply never asked. My son never wanted to know what I did for a living. You never showed interest in truly knowing me. You only cared that I was small, invisible, convenient. You're a manipulator. All this time you pretended to be a weak old woman so we would drop our guard." I stood up, slowly, without rushing. I looked down at her now. "I didn't pretend to be weak. You assumed I was. There's a difference. And today you didn't lose because I wanted revenge. You lost because you came unprepared. Because you relied on your arrogance instead of your work. That defeat is entirely yours." Valerie clenched her fists. For a moment I thought she would try to hit me again, but the security guard moved closer, and she realized where she was, that she couldn't do anything anymore. This is not over. I'm going to appeal. I'm going to prove there was a conflict of interest, that you couldn't be a judge in a case where I was the attorney. Go ahead. Appeal. But I warn you that the entire proceeding was recorded. Every word, every decision, and any judge who reviews this case will come to the same conclusion. You lost because your case was weak, not because I was your mother-in-law. Valerie walked down the steps. She walked toward the exit with quick steps. Her assistant followed her, carrying all the folders. When she reached the door, she stopped. She turned around one last time. Charles deserves better than a mother like you. The words should have hurt me. A few months ago they would have shattered me. But now I just let them float in the air, weightless, powerless. Charles deserves a mother who doesn't have to hide to be loved, and a wife who doesn't manipulate him to get what she wants. But those are decisions he will have to make alone. Valerie slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in the now empty room. Charles was still sitting in his spot, motionless, as if he couldn't decide what to do, where to go, who to believe. I stepped down from the bench. I took off the robe slowly, folding it carefully. Patricia appeared at the door. Do you need anything, Mrs. Parker? No, thank you, Patricia. I'm done here. I walked toward the exit. I had to pass by Charles. When I reached him, he stood up. We looked at each other for the first time in years, really looked, without Valerie in between, without excuses, without lies. Mum. His voice broke. I saw tears in his eyes. But I didn't stop. Not yet. Because there were things that needed to be said. And this wasn't the time or the place. Charles, when you're ready to talk for real, you know where I live. In that little house your wife is so ashamed of. In that house you plan to sell out from under me without asking. His face paled even more. How do you know that? I saw Valerie's message on your phone 6 months ago, declaring me incompetent, selling my house, putting me in a nursing home, all planned without my knowledge, without my consent. Charles recoiled as if I had hit him. It wasn't. She was just what, Charles? Planning my life without consulting me, stealing my dignity? And you? Were you just going to allow it? Without defending me? Without even asking me if I agreed? He didn't answer. He dropped back into the chair, his hands covering his face. I wanted to have this conversation at another time. I wanted to give you time to process everything you just discovered about me. But you need to know something right now. I am not the enemy. I never was. I was just a mother who loved her son so much she made herself invisible so as not to inconvenience him, and that was my mistake. Mum, I didn't know. I didn't know you were a judge. I didn't know how important you were. I didn't know anything. Exactly. You didn't know because you never asked. Because you assumed my life began and ended with being your mother. Because Valerie convinced you I was a hindrance, and you believed her. I hung the robe over my arm. I took a step toward the door. But Charles stopped me. What am I going to do now? I turned to look at him. My son, the boy I had raised alone, the man he had become, and whom I no longer recognized. You're going to decide, Charles. Are you going to decide if you want to continue being the man who allows his wife to humiliate his mother, or if you want to get back some of the person you used to be? But that decision is yours, not mine. I can no longer make it for you. I left the courtroom. Patricia was waiting for me in the hallway with a sad smile. You were incredible, Mrs. Parker. Everyone is talking about you, saying you are the same brilliant judge you always were. I don't feel brilliant, Patricia. I feel tired. She hugged me, and for the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what had just happened, of what I had had to do, of how I had exposed my own family in front of strangers. But I also felt something else. I felt that I had recovered something I had lost years ago. My voice, my identity, my power. Louis was waiting for me in the lobby. When he saw me, he smiled. "Judge Parker, it was an honor to see you work again." "Thank you, Louis, for everything, for helping me get here." "What's next?" I took out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved for months, the one for the court reporter at the local newspaper. She had covered many of my cases when I was active. She knew my reputation. She answered on the third ring. "Judge Parker, I can't believe it's you. I thought you had fully retired." "I did, but today I came back for a special case, and I think I have a story that will interest you." I told her everything, not with personal details, but with facts. A respected retired judge returning for a day. An arrogant attorney who turns out to be her daughter-in-law. A hearing where professionalism overcame arrogance. A fair verdict, despite family ties. The reporter listened in silence. I could hear her pen scribbling notes on the other end of the line. "This is going on the front page tomorrow. It's exactly the kind of story people need to read. Just make sure it's accurate. I don't want unnecessary drama. Just the truth. The truth is dramatic enough on its own, Judge." I hung up. Louis looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure about making this public?" "Completely sure. Because if I don't do it, Valerie is going to tell her version. She's going to say I was unfair, that I abused my power, that I persecuted her for revenge, and I'm not going to give her that opportunity." We left the courthouse together. The afternoon sun hit my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin. When I opened them, I saw Charles standing next to his car, alone. Valerie was already gone. He looked at me from afar, as if he wanted to approach, but didn't know how. I looked back at him, and then I turned and walked toward the taxi Louis had called. I had spent 30 years of my life putting Charles first, sacrificing myself, making myself small, hoping he would see me. But today, for the first time in decades, I put myself first, and it felt like freedom. The news was on the front page of the newspaper the next morning. The headline was simple but forceful. "Retired judge returns to deliver justice in case involving her daughter-in-law as attorney." The photo accompanying the article was of me, from my active years at the courthouse, wearing the robe and that serious gaze I always used during hearings. The article was accurate, professional. It detailed my 30-year career as a judge, the important cases I had resolved, my impeccable reputation, and then it narrated what happened the day before. How Valerie Logan had lost an important case in front of the judge, who turned out to be her mother-in-law. How the hearing had been recorded and reviewed by other judges, who confirmed that the entire proceeding was impartial and fair. The reporter had also gotten statements from attorneys who were present in the courtroom. They all agreed on the same thing. Attorney Logan had arrived unprepared. Her arguments had huge holes. The verdict was correct based solely on the evidence presented. My phone started ringing at 7 o'clock in the morning. Former colleagues, judges I had worked with, professors from the law school, everyone called to congratulate me, to tell me they had missed me, to ask if I would consider coming back, even as a consultant. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the phone at Charles's firm also started ringing. But those calls were very different. Clients asking why Valerie Logan was still working there after such public humiliation. Partners worried about the firm's reputation. Young attorneys whispering in the hallways. Louis arrived at my house at 10 o'clock with another folder. This time it wasn't about the courthouse case. It was about something much more serious. Mrs. Parker, we need to talk about what we found. We can't wait any longer. He opened the folder on my kitchen table. Bank documents, transfers, emails, all the evidence of Valerie's fraud. The $50,000 diverted from the firm, the hidden debts, the forged mortgage on Charles's house. And there's more. I spoke with a friend on the State Bar Ethics Board. Valerie has 3 formal complaints against her for malpractice. Cases where she didn't show up to hearings, clients she never called back, documents she never prepared. Does Charles know anything about this? I don't think so. I've reviewed everything, and it seems Valerie managed the firm's finances alone. Charles signed whatever she put in front of him without checking. He trusted her completely. Until yesterday. Exactly until yesterday. My doorbell rang. Louis and I exchanged glances. I wasn't expecting visitors. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was Charles. He was standing at my entrance, the newspaper folded under his arm, with deep dark circles under his eyes, and his suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. If he had slept at all. I opened the door slowly. Charles. Mum, can I come in? I stepped aside. He walked in and stopped when he saw Louis sitting at the kitchen table, with all the documents spread out. His face turned pale. What is all this? Louis started to gather the papers, but I stopped him. Leave them, Louis. Charles has the right to know. My son approached the table. He looked at the documents, the numbers, the emails. He picked one up, then another. His hands started to tremble. This is from the firm. These are our accounts. Why do you have this? Because I needed to protect myself, Charles. When I found out you planned to declare me incompetent and sell my house, I hired Louis to investigate, and we found much more than we expected. Charles read in silence for several minutes. I watched as his expression changed from confusion to disbelief and then to pure horror. $50,000. She took $50,000. And this mortgage, my signature is here, but I never signed this. It's forgery, Louis said softly. Valerie mortgaged your house without your consent. She used the money to pay her own debts. Charles slumped into a chair. He dropped the papers on the table as if they burned. I can't believe this, all this time. I thought we were building something together. I thought she loved me. I sat across from him, for the first time in years. We were alone, without Valerie between us, without lies, without acting. Charles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Whatever it is, Mum, did you really want to declare me incompetent? Or was it all her idea? He looked up. Tears ran down his face. She said you were losing your memory, that you were forgetting things, that one day she found you confused in the street without remembering how you had gotten there. She said you were becoming dangerous to yourself, that it was for your own good. That never happened, Charles. Never. My mind is perfect. I have recent medical evaluations that prove it. Valerie invented all that to convince you that I was incompetent. But why? Why would she do something like that? I showed him the documents of her debts, the expired loans, the threats of foreclosure, the calls from collectors. Because she needed money desperately, and my house is worth $200,000, it was her salvation. But to get it, she first had to get me out of the way. Charles put his hands to his head. His whole body trembled. My God, what have I done? I abandoned you. I left you alone. I allowed her to treat you like trash. And all this time you were... You are a judge, a respected professional, a woman who sacrificed everything to give you a better life. Yes, Charles, that's what I am. Why did you never tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for being your mother, not for being important, not for having a title, just for being me. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Silence filled the kitchen. Louis had stayed quiet, giving us space. Finally, Charles spoke in a hoarse voice. What are you going to do with all this? With the evidence of the fraud? With the forgery? That decision is yours, Charles. You are her husband. You are her partner in the firm. If you present this evidence, Valerie will lose her license to practice. She will probably face criminal charges. Your reputation will also suffer because you are her partner. But if you don't do anything, she will continue to destroy everything she touches. I can't. I need time to think. You don't have much time. The State Bar auditors are already reviewing the firm because of the complaints against her. They will find the missing money eventually. It's better if you get ahead of it. Charles stood up. He walked to the window. He looked outside without really seeing anything. I loved her, Mum, or I thought I loved her. Now I don't know what was real and what was a lie. I approached him. I put my hand on his shoulder. He felt thinner, more fragile than I remembered. Sometimes the people we love are not who we think they are, and accepting that hurts more than anything else. But you have to decide, son. Are you going to protect her, or are you going to protect yourself? Charles turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw the boy he had been, scared, lost, seeking guidance. What would you do? I already made my decision. I protected myself. I defended myself. And I recovered my dignity. Now it's your turn to do the same. He nodded slowly. He took the documents from the table. He tucked them under his arm. I'm going to talk to the auditors. I'm going to hand over everything. And I'm going to divorce Valerie. The words sounded firm, decisive. For the first time in years, my son was making a decision for himself. And the girls? I asked softly. The girls are going to meet their real grandmother, not the tiny little situation Valerie wanted you to be. The real woman, the judge, the fighter. Charles approached and hugged me. A long hug, tight, full of years of distance and regret. Forgive me, Mum, for everything. I hugged him back, feeling how something inside me, something that had been broken for so long, finally began to heal. 3 months later, my life was completely different. Charles presented all the evidence of the fraud to the State Bar and to the corresponding authorities. Valerie lost her license to practice. She faced charges for forgery and embezzlement. The firm had to temporarily close while the audits were carried out. But Charles managed to save it by completely separating himself from her and returning the stolen money with his own savings. The divorce was fast. Valerie didn't fight. She had nothing to fight with. Her reputation was destroyed. Her debts pursued her. And worst of all, she had lost the control she had always had over Charles. I didn't attend any of the divorce hearings, not because I didn't care, but because it was no longer my battle. It was Charles's, and he needed to face it alone. But what I did do was open the doors of my house, literally. One Saturday afternoon, Charles arrived with Natalie and Olivia, my granddaughters, the first time I had seen them in over a year. Natalie was 10 years old now. Olivia, 8. 2 beautiful girls with curious eyes and shy smiles. Girls, this is your grandmother, the real grandmother. Natalie looked at me with fascination. She had read the newspaper article. Charles had shown it to her. Were you really a judge, Grandma? For real? I really was. For 30 years. And you decided who won and who lost. I knelt down to their level. Not exactly like that. I listened to both sides. I reviewed the evidence. And then I made the fairest decision according to the law. Olivia, the youngest, approached timidly. Mummy always said that you weren't important. I took her little hand in mine. Your mummy was wrong about many things. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that now we can get to know each other. Would you like that? Both nodded. And that day I baked cookies with them. I showed them photos of when Charles was a boy. I told them stories about their grandfather Michael. I talked to them about cases I had resolved, adapting the stories to be appropriate for their age. And for the first time in years, my house was filled with laughter, with life, with real family. Charles stayed quiet most of the time, just watching, with tears in his eyes that he discreetly wiped away when he thought no one saw him. Before they left, he hugged me at the door. Thank you, Mum, for not giving up, for being stronger than all of us put together. I wasn't strong, Charles. I just stopped pretending to be weak. The following weeks turned into months, and slowly we built something new. Charles came to dinner on Sundays with the girls. We talked. We really talked. About his work, about his fears, about how to rebuild his life. I also started rebuilding mine. I agreed to give some lectures at the law school on judicial ethics, on how to maintain impartiality even in personally difficult situations. The students listened to me with respect, with admiration. I also agreed to work as a mediator in family dispute cases. It turned out that my personal experience had given me a unique perspective. I could see both sides, understand the pain of abandoned parents and the confusion of manipulated children. Louis became a close friend. We had lunch together once a week. We talked about cases, about life, about second chances. One day he said something I will never forget. Mrs. Parker, when I met you 20 years ago, you gave me my life back. Now I feel honored to have helped you recover yours. Patricia also came back into my life. She retired from the courthouse, but we met for coffee. She told me gossip about the new judges. I told her about my granddaughters. And Valerie. Well, Valerie disappeared from our lives. I heard she moved to another city, that she was working on something that didn't require a law license. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing it, only a distant sadness for all the potential she had wasted due to greed and arrogance. 6 months after the day in the courthouse, I received an official letter. It was from the Judicial Systems Board of Directors. They were offering me to return as a consultant judge, a special position created specifically for me. I would only work 2 days a week. I would review complex cases. I would advise young judges. Charles was with me when I opened the letter. He read over my shoulder. Are you going to accept? I looked at the letter. Then I looked at him. What do you think? I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Mum. You've spent enough time living for others. I accepted the position. And the first day I returned to the courthouse, this time officially and not just for a special case, I walked through those hallways with my head held high. I greeted old colleagues, I met the new ones, and I sat in my office with my name on the door. Judge Agnes Parker, Judicial Consultant. That afternoon, when I got home, I found a bouquet of flowers at my door. The card read, "Because it's never too late to bloom again. With love, Charles, Natalie, and Olivia." I sat in my living room, the same room where I had spent so many nights alone and broken, and I cried. But they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of liberation, of closure, of a new beginning. I thought about everything that had happened, The humiliation at the courthouse door, the years of silence and pain, the moment I decided that enough was enough. Valerie's look when she saw me sitting in the judge's chair, and I thought about who I was now. No longer the invisible mother who made herself small to be loved. No longer the woman who hid her achievements like shameful secrets. Now I was simply Agnes, complete, whole, unapologetic. My phone rang. It was Natalie, calling on a video call. "Grandma, can you help me with my homework? It's about the judicial system." "Of course, my love. Tell me what you need." As I explained the 3 branches of government to her, I smiled, because this was what I had always wanted. Not to be feared for my title, not to be respected for my power, just to be known, to be seen, to be loved for who I really was. That night, before sleeping, I looked at myself in the mirror. 71 years old, grey hair, wrinkles that told stories, but also eyes that shone with renewed life, with recovered purpose. I spoke to myself softly, as I had done so many times in the dark days. But this time the words were different. My name is Agnes Parker. I was a judge for 30 years. I raised my son alone. I survived abandonment. I survived betrayal. And I didn't just survive, I was reborn. My name is no longer just that of mother, that of mother-in-law, that of the old woman who is in the way. My name is mine again, and my story is just beginning.